Hey guys, hope everyone is doing well today. I was looking over the weekly Torah portion, which this week it's going to be Toldot. That's going to be found in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verse 19 through 28, verse 9, I believe. And so that introduces Jacob and Esau into the story. And as I was reading through that, I started having some thoughts about it, and I thought I'd share some of those. But before I get into the heart of that, I'd like to share with you a few verses. This one's from Malachi chapter 3:18. By the way, Malachi is actually part of the Haftarah portion this week, only it's a different section. It's Malachi chapter 1. This is Malachi 3:18, and it says, "Then shall you return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serves God and him that serves him not." So I thought that was pretty interesting when you begin to break these things down and think about it, that there will come a time when people will begin to be able to discern between the person that is righteous and the person that is wicked. So the verse obviously strongly implies that before this time gets there, that there won't be very many people that are capable of that. But there will come a time when people will be able to begin to have better discernment and tell if someone is really a person that serves God or not. And there's some other verses that are similar to this. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 44, verse 23, it says, "And they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and profane, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean." So once again, if people were able to know and discern this on their own, there would not be a need for them to be taught the difference between holy and profane, or holy and common, or clean and unclean. So obviously, who God is referring to as my people do not know how, do not have the capability to discern the difference between clean and unclean, or holy from profane or common. And again, above the verse that I read, apparently a lot of God's people can't really discern between the person that's righteous or wicked, or who serves God and doesn't, or from Ezekiel here, the one who most people are incapable of discerning between clean and unclean, or between that which is holy and that which is contaminated. Another verse from Job chapter 6, verse 30, it says, "Is there iniquity in my tongue? Cannot my taste discern perverse things?" And so we're seeing the idea of the tongue or taste being used in the context of being able to discern. And just as the tongue discerns taste, something that is bitter or sweet, there is a spiritual aspect of this, of being able to discern right and wrong, good and evil, clean and unclean, pure from contaminated, holy from that which is common. And so, but notice that it is in line with or related to the sense of taste. Now, I find it pretty interesting that during the time, a number of people that I know who had COVID lost their sense of taste, or lost their sense of smell, or both. Some of them temporarily, and some of them seem to have some permanent problems with that. So I find that really interesting in light of the subject that I'm going to be getting into. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14, it says, "But strong meat," or deeper concepts, we could say, different, more deep, complex spiritual concepts, but strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, or maturity, we would say, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Excuse me. So Hebrews is telling us here, it's those who have grown in maturity and they have practiced certain types of activities, or certain types of discernment, of exercising their senses, as it says here, even whom by reason of use or practice, we could say, have their senses exercised to discern good and evil. And so we're talking about senses here, the subject of senses, and learning to develop those senses, because senses are a means by which we can discern things. Now, we have to distinguish and parse out the difference between physical senses and spiritual senses. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 46, it says that the things that are natural come first, and afterward that which are spiritual. And so just as we have these 5 physical senses, there is a spiritual counterpart or spiritual side to these senses. So that would be spiritual seeing, spiritual hearing. You understand a lot of these concepts already. That when Yeshua talks about he who has an ear, let him hear, he's talking about spiritual discerning or spiritual hearing. And so we might think from time to time on these subjects of spiritual perception, spiritual hearing, spiritual seeing, but not too much usually about some of the other senses, such as the sense of smell, the spiritual sense of smell. And so that's kind of what I want to explore today, because I was thinking about it as I started looking into this week's Torah portion. And if you're familiar with the story, you'll remember that Jacob had prepared this red stew, and Esau, his brother, his twin brother, come in from a hunt and was famished and wanted some of that stew. And Jacob said, okay, sure, if you'll sell your birthright to me today, and you have to swear that you're going to sell your birthright to me for this stew. And so Esau said, yeah, what good is this birthright to me? I'm about to die. It's a whole teaching and conversation in itself of getting into this idea, but it's interesting because a little bit later in chapter 27, we get into the scene where Rebekah counsels Jacob to disguise himself as his brother Esau and go into Isaac, who believes he's near death, and Isaac is going to pronounce the blessing over his son Esau, he thinks. But Rachel counsels Jacob to disguise himself as Esau, to go in and basically steal Esau's blessing. So I find it pretty interesting that the birthright and the blessing were both lost by Esau and gained by Jacob through the catalyst or medium of food. And I would like to do sometime a video on the concept of food, because beyond just the physicality of that, of really the spiritual meaning and understanding behind a lot of these things. But today I'd like to focus a little bit more on the sense of smell. And so let's look at Genesis 27, starting at verse 1. It says, and it came to pass that when Isaac was old, excuse me, and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see. So we're seeing a deficiency in really one of the main, the most important, according to many philosophers, is the sense of sight. Other philosophers and theologians believe the sense of hearing is the most important, but that's another topic. So that he could not see. So Isaac is old and he's unable to see, it says. It says that he called Esau, his eldest son, and said unto him, my son, and he said unto him, behold, here am I. And he came to his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said unto him, because Jacob's got on the disguise, and I've gone into some of that before. Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done everything according as you have said. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, and thy soul may bless me. So that's a pretty interesting concept to think about too, that again, the catalyst by which this blessing will be inspired is because of food. And so when we see something like that, I find it interesting. I like to think about it and ask why. It reminds me a little bit of the passage where Elisha, the protege or student of Elijah, Eliyahu, called for a minstrel or a musician to play so that he could prophesy. And apparently this was that was a technique utilized by many of the prophets to bring on the inspiration so that they would then prophesy. So, which is interesting that, you know, some of them just were maybe led, as we would say, and prophesy, but often there's some sort of catalyst that inspires that. And so, like music is a major catalyst to bring upon the supernatural giftings, as we see in the scripture. And because of what it bypasses a lot of times the intellect and goes directly to the emotions or even more primal levels. But here we're talking about food through the sense of taste. It is going to inspire Isaac to prophesy and pronounce this blessing over Esau, he thinks, but as we said, it's really Jacob that is going to be getting that blessing. And he says, and Isaac said unto his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God has brought it to me. Which, I don't know about you guys, but when I read this section, I encourage you to go and read this narrative here in Genesis 27. It reminds me a lot of, what's her name? Little Red Riding Hood, talking to the wolf dressed up like the grandmother. And she's kind of a little bit suspicious for some reason and keeps asking these probing questions, and you can sense that apprehension and suspiciousness when it comes to Isaac here as he continues to prod and ask questions of Jacob. And Isaac said unto Jacob, come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether you be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him. And he said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So we're seeing that all of these senses are engaged. Now, it tells us right away that Isaac couldn't see, but now we see him utilizing his hearing. He says the voice is Jacob, but when he touches him, he says, you know, it feels like the hands of Esau. So he's making these discernments through these physical senses. In verse 23, interestingly, in this translation, and he discerned him not, okay, because his hands were hairy, as his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. Verse 24, and he said, are you my very son Esau? And he said, I am. Are you really Esau? He said, I am. Completely lied about it. Verse 25, and he said, bring it near to me, that is the food, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee. Again, this is going to inspire him and motivate him to prophesy and give this blessing. And he brought it near to him, and he did eat, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said unto him, come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near, and he kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him. So, when he came near and Jacob kissed him up close, he smelled Esau's distinct odor, and he blessed him. So, ultimately, what it was that inspired the blessing was the sense of smell. And it says, And he blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. And then he begins this blessing. Motivated, inspired by this sense of smell. Even though the catalyst for all of this was the sense of taste, ultimately, he didn't bless him until he was inspired by the sense of smell. And I love it when I begin to find things like this and discover concepts that are all through the scripture that I never really put together or thought about. Now, this is something I've been actually thinking about for a number of years in sort of compiling data and information about when I think about it or notice something. But it's amazing when you begin to see the significance and the amazing importance of the sense of smell in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 8, verse 21, it says, and the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. And so this is after the flood of Noah, and Noah built an altar, and he offered up a sacrifice, and it says, and God smelled a sweet savor, and that inspired God to make a promise that he would not again destroy the entire earth through the waters of a flood again, because of being inspired by the sense of smell and of Noah's offering. There's a number of places that liken a proper offering with a sweet savor unto the Lord. And from what I remember, that is from the words, what is it, ruach nuach, or maybe vice versa, that we could interpret as comforting spirit. And Exodus chapter 30, verse 38, it talks about the prohibition when making the incense that is going to be put upon the golden altar that's right outside of the Holy of Holies, or the Kiddush Kiddushim, that there's a warning and a commandment, a prohibition against making anything like it for people to smell. Okay, so we're talking a holy scent here that is only meant for God and not meant for common usage of just anyone. And it says, you know, anyone who makes a compound of these spices, as God has commanded, for their own personal use, are going to be severely punished because of misusing this sense of smell. And when we get to the book of Philippians, let me read Leviticus 26, verse 31 first. And I will make your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation, and I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. So God turning his back upon his people is in the context of him refusing to smell the sweet incense or the sweet savor of their sacrifices. And I'll remind you, there's lots of different kinds of sacrifices: the sacrifice of praise, the sacrifice of thanksgiving, and so on. So don't just think total physicality here, although we certainly wouldn't want to exclude that. And now the book of Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 17. Not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. But I have all and abound. I am full, having received Epaphroditus, the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. And so Paul likens the gifts and the service of the Philippians with a sweet savor and a sacrifice that is acceptable. In the book of Genesis, we had this, in Genesis 34, the situation where Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, had gone into this city called Shechem and had slaughtered everyone. And when Jacob found out what had happened, he was alarmed, and he said, and Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land. And so this problem that they had created for Jacob, he euphemistically expresses in the context of smell, that you caused me to stink in the nostrils of the inhabitants around me. You caused me disfavor with these people, but it's compared to something that stinks. And interesting, you know, the concept of an abomination. When we look, for example, in the New Testament, bedelgema, if I'm pronouncing that right, is the Greek word that from where we get the word abomination translated, and it says to reek with stench. And so the concept of an abomination, the thing that is detestable to God or people, comes from the idea of something that stinks, or a stench, something that reeks horribly. That's what an abomination is to God, something that stinks or smells horribly, in contrast to a sweet savor, something that brings God near to us. This other brings abominations, causes God to turn away from a people or individuals. All right. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, we read, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So the way man was animated and brought to life and became a living soul was through his nostrils. Through his nostrils was the means by which man became animated and given life. Okay, I find that pretty interesting. Genesis chapter 3, we have the famous story of Adam and Eve and the serpent in the garden. And we see, and the serpent said unto the woman, you shall not surely die. That is, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you won't really die. For God knows that in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that's taste, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, that's sight, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, and she took of the fruit thereof, touched it, and did eat, and gave it to her husband with her, and he did eat. So we see all of the senses of Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, engaged in what becomes the fall. So all of their senses end up being used by the Nakash, or the serpent, to bring their downfall. And it says, and the eyes of them both were open. So on some level, their eyes were opened up, but on another level, their perception and eyes were closed. And so it's an interesting contrast when we look at the garden scene, and this kind of hit me this morning, when we look at all of the senses being used there except the sense of smell. The sense of smell was the one sense not involved in the fall. And so the rabbis talk about how that it was all of these other senses that were utilized in the eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the ultimate fall in that disobedience were negatively impacted. And so those senses were much stronger. Adam and Eve, their senses were much stronger, more pronounced, and powerful before the fall. After that, they immediately began to decline. And so after they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, it said that their eyes were open. Now, their natural eyes, their physical eyes, in seeing things through physical eyes were enhanced, but their spiritual insight and vision was closed. Excuse me, getting all choked up. And So when we look at this narrative and compare it with the one with Isaac and what happened, we have a similar thing going on, only he can't see, as probably an ultimate result of what Adam and Eve did, of their natural eyes being open, but their spiritual eyes beginning to close. Well, Isaac's natural eyes were not working so well, but he still had spiritual discernment, and it was through his sense of smell that this important blessing came. And so, as I said, the rabbis believed that because the sense of smell was not used, it was not used or mentioned here, that the sense of smell was not impacted negatively to the degree of these other senses. And so the sense of smell is really important in a lot of areas that we don't often think about. Like if someone faints, let's say, or gets knocked out, do we shine lights in their face or yell and scream at them or touch them? No, none of that may not do any good. We give them smelling salts, and that reaches something deep inside of the brain that awakens the person. And it's interesting that sense, that is the sense of smell, they bypass the thalamus and go straight to the brain's smell center, known as the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is directly connected to the amygdala and the hippocampus, which might explain why the sense of smell can immediately trigger emotions and memory so strongly. Talking about animals, dogs can actually smell if someone has cancer or other things like that through their sense of smell. Aromatherapy is like a huge thing, and it's been a big thing in our time because it's so effective. The certain scents can change your mood and improve your health, improve your whole outlook. And I know that it impacts me a lot. I really like, when I walk into a room and I smell a nice candle or incense or some kind of nice smelling air freshener or something like that, or coffee or something like that, good smelling coffee brewing, it changes my mood. And the sense of smell, you probably experienced it like I have. Every now and then I'll just suddenly smell something and it will take me back in time to a moment that maybe I had forgotten all about through the sense of smell. The sense of smell is tied directly somehow with memory, much stronger it seems than a lot of the other senses. Some companies, by the way, even have their own brand of smell. So when you walk into their store, they have a distinct scent that you smell that is created specifically for that company. In the book of Isaiah or Yeshayahu, we see this messianic passage here speaking of the future Messiah, which we know to be Yeshua. And it says, and he shall make him, that is, God is going to make his Messiah of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. You're probably familiar with this. So his major discernment, it says, talking about the Messiah, is not going to be through his eyes or his ears, but with righteousness he will judge. Now, it's interesting that the term that is translated quick understanding there in Isaiah, because it says, and he, that is God, will make him the Messiah of quick understanding. It's the Hebrew term vahariko. And the root of that word means to smell. And so the rabbis infer and interpret from that, with, I think, very good reason, that in the future, the Messiah will have a supernatural sense of smell, and he won't make determinations by what he sees or by what he hears, but he will smell out the truth. And it sounds a little bit strange until you really think about it, but we actually use a lot of those figures of speech in our culture. We might say that I smell a rat here. In other words, I suspicion that some sort of sabotage by someone close. Or we might say, this doesn't pass the smell test. In other words, something about this doesn't seem or feel right. But we use that analogy to the sense of smell. And so I thought I would just share some of those things with you as you go through some of these passages, like if you're reading the Torah portion this week about Isaac and pronouncing the blessing over Jacob. Think about all of the passages that connect with this, and I want you to notice that it was the sense of smell that ultimately inspired this blessing that is going to be put upon Jacob or Yaakov, that through him all of the nations will be blessed, and that he will become Israel, whom God will call himself after, that I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. And the catalyst for all of that was the sense of smell. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion today and gotten something out of it. Be sure and hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't, and also hit the notification button. And if you know someone who likes this kind of thing, be sure and share it with them, and share it on your Facebook, or share it places, and hopefully it will. I want to cause people to see how amazing the scriptures are, and that it's not like what a lot of people think, that they are very deep, and there's a lot of things going on that tie in physiology and psychology and sociology and philosophy and all kinds of things that a lot of people don't think about, because we're conditioned to think of things in such a compartmentalized, fragmented way. But there's so many connections. You look at one passage and it's going to connect so many other passages if you really study and you really begin to think about it. So thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you guys real soon. Take care.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.